The headquarters of Caldwell Technologies was buzzing with panic. On the top floor, where the billionaire CEO and his directors ruled, screens suddenly went black. Years of research, billions in assets, and the entire reputation of the company hung by a thread. The system had crashed. Alarms blared, experts stumbled over their words, and the mighty CEO's face turned pale as he realized he was powerless. And then, a voice no one expected broke the chaos. "I know how," said Ethan, the janitor, standing quietly at the back with a mop still in his hands. The room froze. Laughter rippled through the executives. How could the lowest man in the building dare to speak at such a moment? Yet behind his humble uniform and downcast eyes was a knowledge none of them possessed. They had mocked him. They had ignored him. But tonight, when the empire of a billionaire was seconds from collapse, it would be Ethan, the invisible janitor, who would step forward and save it all. The panic spread like wildfire through the glass corridors of Caldwell Technologies. Executives whispered frantically into their phones, IT teams rushed from cubicle to cubicle, and the security staff tightened the doors, as if sealing the building could prevent disaster. The system that powered their billion-dollar empire was down, and no one knew why. It wasn't just files or emails, the very servers that ran their operations had gone silent. Clients overseas were already calling, furious that transactions had frozen mid-process. Journalists, tipped off by someone inside, were circling the building like vultures. The company's reputation, polished to a shine over decades, was seconds away from ruin. In the midst of the chaos, Ethan Rivera silently pushed his cleaning cart down the hall. He wore his faded uniform, the logo on his shirt nearly invisible from too many washes. His mop bucket squeaked with every push, a sound drowned out by the nervous chatter of executives. He wasn't part of this world, not really. His job was to make sure the pristine floors of this glass palace gleamed. He was invisible, a shadow moving among titans. On the executive floor, the directors huddled in a glass-walled conference room. Their voices were sharp, anxious, and full of blame. At the center sat Richard Caldwell, the billionaire CEO, his tailored suit rumpled for the first time anyone could remember. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he slammed his hand against the table. "Where are the experts?" he barked. "I don't pay millions for a team that can't fix a simple system crash." One of the directors, Ms. Hargrave, adjusted her diamond necklace and snapped back, "We've called every top consultant. They're on their way, but time is against us. If this blackout lasts another hour, we could lose contracts worth billions. Investors will abandon us. The press will crucify us." Another director chimed in, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This is sabotage. It has to be. No system just fails like this. We should fire the entire IT department immediately." Ethan paused outside the glass wall, pretending to polish the brass door handle, but listening carefully. His heart beat faster. He knew the tone of panic. He had read about failures like this during his late-night study sessions in the library. He wasn't just a janitor, he was self-taught in programming, cybersecurity, and system architecture. For years, he had studied in silence, fascinated by the very systems Caldwell Technologies boasted about. And now, he recognized the signs of what might be happening. Inside, the CEO buried his face in his hands. "If the system isn't back online by tonight," he whispered, "we're finished." The room fell silent. Then, as if on cue, laughter erupted from one of the younger executives, a tall man with slick back hair and a smirk that never seemed to leave his lips. "Maybe we should ask the janitor," he sneered, pointing through the glass at Ethan, who froze mid-motion. "He's been here longer than most of us. Perhaps he has some magical mop that can clean up this mess." The boardroom erupted in cruel chuckles. Ethan lowered his eyes, gripping the handle of his mop tighter. The sting of their laughter burned, but he said nothing. He had been invisible for so long, insults barely touched him anymore. Still, part of him ached, not from the humiliation itself, but from the knowledge that he might actually be able to help. Moments later, the IT director entered the room, pale and trembling. "Sir," he stammered, "we've tried everything. The crash isn't local. It's deep in the architecture, maybe even an external attack. If we don't isolate it soon, we could lose everything. Then fix it. Caldwell roared, slamming his fist down again. We can't. Not without shutting down the entire network. Which means losing every unsaved file, every ongoing transaction, every live client feed. The directors gasped. The weight of billions of dollars pressed against the walls of the room. At that exact moment, Ethan's voice, soft but steady, carried across the chaos. He hadn't planned to speak. But the words slipped out anyway. I know how. The room froze. Every executive turned toward him, their expensive suits and polished shoes radiating power and disdain. Caldwell narrowed his eyes. What did you just say? Ethan swallowed hard, but kept his voice calm. I think I know what's happening with the system. I can help. The directors burst into laughter. Hargrave covered her mouth with her jeweled hand, mocking him. You? The janitor? You think you're smarter than teams of experts? The young executive who had mocked him earlier leaned back in his chair, smirking. Oh, this is rich. Maybe he'll patch the servers with duct tape and bleach. Another chimed in, crueler still, why don't you stick to toilets, kid? This is a billion-dollar empire, not a computer game. Their laughter rang louder, crueler. Ethan stood there, gripping his mop, feeling the weight of every insult. But he didn't step back. His eyes, calm and unwavering, stayed fixed on the CEO. Caldwell, though, wasn't laughing. He leaned forward, curiosity flickering behind his stern gaze. And how exactly, he asked, his voice low and sharp, would you fix a system that has brought this company to its knees? The challenge hung in the air. Everyone in the room smirked, certain that the janitor would crumble under the pressure. They expected him to shrink, to stutter, to walk away in shame. But Ethan didn't move. His silence wasn't fear, it was thought, calculation. He knew he could fix it. He knew the answer was within his reach. Yet the room was against him. Every pair of eyes watched, waiting for him to fail. The humiliation had been planted, watered, and grown to its peak. The next moment would decide everything. And then, with a smile cold enough to slice the air, Caldwell spoke, fine. If you think you can do better than my million-dollar experts, prove it. The system is yours. Gasps echoed through the room. The directors laughed louder than ever, convinced this was nothing but a cruel joke. They had just handed the janitor the impossible, the chance to fix what no one else could. And if he failed, his humiliation would be eternal. The room crackled with tension. Billionaires and directors sneered, convinced Ethan was about to embarrass himself forever. But what they didn't know was that this janitor had spent years quietly mastering the very skills they now desperately needed. And it's right here, in moments like this, that I want to pause and ask you something. How many times have you felt underestimated? How many times have people laughed at you, certain you had nothing to offer, only for you to surprise them? If you've ever been in Ethan's shoes, this story is for you. And if you want to hear more stories of underdogs proving everyone wrong, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Because the best way to silence doubt is to keep showing up and surprising the world. The directors leaned back in their leather chairs, smirks plastered across their faces as if they had already written Ethan's failure into the company record. For them, this was entertainment, the janitor fumbling before an empire of power. But Ethan didn't move with hesitation. He walked toward the console at the center of the room, his mop still in hand, until he gently set it aside. His fingers brushed over the keyboard like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Step aside, the IT director snapped, rolling his eyes. This is highly sensitive equipment, not a toy. But Caldwell silenced him with a single raised hand. Let him try, the CEO ordered. His voice carried a dangerous mix of curiosity and disdain. He expected failure, yes, but there was something in Ethan's steady gaze that made him pause. The janitor sat before the glowing console. Error messages screamed in red across every screen. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos, incomprehensible strings of code, corrupted data, endless alerts. But to Ethan, it was a puzzle. A living, breathing system crying out for someone who could listen. He began typing. At first, the executives chuckled, amused by the audacity. "Look at him pretending," one muttered. Another whispered, probably Googling how to fix a server crash. Their laughter filled the room like static, but Ethan blocked it out. Lines of code flew across the screens as Ethan's mind pieced together the architecture he had studied late into countless nights. He recognized the patterns, the vulnerabilities. This wasn't a random crash. It was deliberate, a targeted attack, exploiting a weakness hidden deep within Caldwell's over-engineered system. Whoever had launched it was no amateur. The IT team leaned closer, their smirks fading into confusion. "Wait, what is he doing?" one whispered. Ethan executed a command string none of them had considered, rerouting traffic through a backup protocol buried so deep in the system manual most professionals never even knew it existed. The executives stopped laughing. The screens, though still unstable, began to respond. Graphs flickered, error messages shifted, and for the first time in hours, progress appeared. Caldwell narrowed his eyes. "What are you seeing that my team missed?" he asked. Ethan's voice was calm, almost detached. "It's not a hardware failure. It's an infiltration. Someone's been inside your system for weeks, waiting for the right moment to trigger a collapse. They masked their tracks so well that anyone following the usual protocols would miss it." The IT director scoffed. "Impossible. We've run diagnostics." "Your diagnostics are part of the trap," Ethan interrupted, his tone firm. He pointed at the screen. "See that? Every time you run your test, it resets the counter and hides the breach. You've been feeding the problem without realizing it." The director fell silent. His face flushed red with embarrassment. Ethan kept typing, his focus unshaken. He isolated the malicious code, a worm twisting itself through the database, threatening to erase terabytes of data. His hands moved quickly, creating a digital quarantine around the infection. The system groaned, fought back, but Ethan's commands wrapped tighter, sealing the breach. For the first time, the executives leaned forward. Their eyes no longer held ridicule, but something closer to awe, though none dared admit it yet. Then, as if on cue, the monitors flashed a violent red. The worm launched its final defense, a surge of corruption meant to overwhelm any containment. Alarm shrieked. "It's spreading again," shouted one of the IT staff, panic rising. Ethan's jaw tightened. He recognized the move, a failsafe from whoever designed the attack. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before everything collapsed for good. His fingers blurred across the keyboard, not just containing but outmaneuvering the code, tricking it into collapsing in on itself. The room held its breath. Executives who moments ago had mocked him now sat frozen, unable to look away. Even Caldwell, his empire teetering on the edge, leaned forward as if pulled by invisible strings. Ethan whispered under his breath, "Come on, work with me." The red alerts slowed. One by one, they blinked away. The worm fought viciously, but Ethan's counterattack was cleaner, sharper. He found its core and delivered the final command, a single keystroke that detonated the malicious code from within. The screens fell silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, green lights began to bloom across the monitors. Systems that had been paralyzed came back online. Graphs rose, steady and strong. The heartbeat of Caldwell Technologies was returning. Gasps echoed through the room. The IT staff stared, dumbfounded. The executive smirks had vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. And Caldwell himself rose to his feet, staring at Ethan like he was seeing him for the first time. But Ethan wasn't finished. His eyes flicked to the data logs, following the trail the worm had left behind. His fingers tapped once more, tracing it back, deeper and deeper, until the origin revealed itself. His chest tightened. He turned to Caldwell. This wasn't random. Someone inside this building planted it. The room erupted in chaos. Directors shouted over one another, accusing, denying, panicking. But Ethan stayed calm, eyes locked on the evidence still blowing on the screen. The real battle was just beginning. The conference room was in uproar. Directors shouted, their voices ricocheting off the glass walls, each one desperate to distance themselves from Ethan's accusation. "This is ridiculous." Hargrave snapped, her jeweled hand trembling against the table. "Are you saying one of us would sabotage our own empire?" Ethan didn't raise his voice. He simply tapped a few more keys, and the log scrolled across the screen like a confession. This code wasn't designed by an outsider. It was written using Caldwell Technologies' own proprietary scripts. Someone with deep internal access wrote this. The IT staff exchanged stunned glances. The executives, suddenly pale, leaned away from the table as if the evidence might burn them. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "Who?" he demanded. Ethan hit one last command. The system's trail pinpointed the source, an encrypted account belonging to the smirking young executive who had mocked him the loudest. The man shot up from his chair, face drained of color. "This is a mistake," he shouted, sweat beading at his temples. "He's framing me." But the evidence was undeniable. The worm had originated from his credentials, his computer, his fingerprint on every line of sabotage. The room turned on him instantly. "You fool," Hargrave hissed. "Do you realize what you've done?" The young executive stumbled backward, words tripping over his tongue. I had no choice. Caldwell never listens. He treats us like pawns. I wanted to prove the system was flawed, that he needed us more than he thought. By destroying billions in assets? Caldwell's voice cut through like steel. By risking the collapse of everything we've built? The executive's knees buckled. He had gone from arrogant to desperate in minutes, exposed under the merciless spotlight of his peers. Security guards entered the room at Caldwell's command, and in front of everyone, the betrayer was escorted out, his protests echoing down the hallway until the doors shut. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. All eyes returned to Ethan. The janitor. He sat before the console, calm, collected, his uniform still faintly damp from cleaning. Yet the empire had been saved not by billion-dollar experts, not by polished executives, but by the invisible worker they had mocked. Caldwell stepped forward. His sharp shoes clicked against the marble floor until he stood just a breath away from Ethan. For the first time, the billionaire didn't look down on him. His voice was low, almost reverent. "How did you know?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "I've been studying systems for years. I don't have degrees or titles, but I know how they think, how they break, and how to keep them alive." The IT staff nodded silently, all replacing their earlier arrogance. They recognized brilliance when they saw it. One of them whispered, "That was masterful." The directors, however, shifted uncomfortably. Their pride had been shattered, their hierarchy inverted by a man they deemed beneath them. Some averted their eyes. Others clenched their jaws, unwilling to admit the truth. Caldwell, though, was not blind. He knew what he had witnessed. Turning to the board, he said, "You all laughed. You doubted. Yet this man saved what none of you could. Without him, Caldwell Technologies would be ashes." The weight of his words hung heavy. For once, not a single executive dared reply. Ethan stood, stepping away from the console. "The system's stable now," he said simply. "But you should review your security. Whoever trusted him with that access shouldn't be trusted again." His humility struck harder than arrogance ever could. He wasn't asking for thanks or titles. He was stating facts, the way someone who truly understood responsibility would. Caldwell looked at him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "You've done more for this company tonight than most of these people will do in their lifetimes." The directors shifted again, some with shame, others with quiet resentment. But none could deny the truth. For the first time, Ethan, the janitor, had silenced a room full of billionaires. And though the crisis was over, the aftermath was only beginning. Because now, the question wasn't whether the company would survive. It was whether they would ever look at the man with the mop the same way again. The next morning, the news broke across every major outlet: Caldwell Technologies saved from catastrophe by janitor. Headlines screamed in disbelief, capturing the story that no one could have predicted. The world devoured it, and for the first time, Ethan's name was spoken with respect rather than dismissal. But inside the tower of glass and steel, the consequences were far more immediate. The directors convened again, this time subdued, their arrogance cracked by the memory of their humiliation. Hargrave, once the loudest in her mockery, avoided Ethan's eyes when he entered the room at Caldwell's request. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, pretending to review papers but really avoiding the weight of guilt. Caldwell began without ceremony. Last night, this company stood at the edge of collapse. None of you could stop it. None, except one man. He gestured toward Ethan, who stood quietly at the back of the room, still wearing his uniform. You laughed at him. You dismissed him. And yet he restored everything. The silence was suffocating. No one dared contradict the CEO. Caldwell's gaze swept across the room. Justice demands accountability. Our saboteur has been turned over to the authorities. But the rest of you, every insult you threw, every laugh you enjoyed, will be remembered. Hargrave spoke up, her voice brittle. Surely you don't mean. I do, Caldwell cut her off sharply. Your bonuses will be frozen this quarter. Consider it a reminder that arrogance is as dangerous as sabotage. The directors shifted in outrage, but none dared protest further. Their shame was punishment enough, etched into every glance at Ethan. For Ethan, justice wasn't about frozen bonuses or public humiliation. It was about truth finally being visible. When he walked through the hallways, people looked at him differently, some with respect, some with guilt, others with envy. But Ethan didn't gloat. He nodded politely, continued his work, and never once let pride consume him. Caldwell, however, wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, he called Ethan into his private office. The billionaire, usually looming and severe, seemed uncharacteristically human. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Ethan obeyed, awkward in the lavish office lined with glass, steel, and leather. Caldwell leaned forward, elbows on his desk. You don't belong with a mop in your hand, he said plainly. You belong here, in systems, in security, maybe even leading a team one day. I'm offering you a position. Ethan shook his head slowly. With respect, sir. I don't need a position. I'm fine where I am. Caldwell frowned. You'd turn down the opportunity of a lifetime? Ethan smiled faintly. I didn't help because I wanted power or money. I helped because it was the right thing to do. My life doesn't need to change for me to know my worth. For a long moment, Caldwell studied him. The humility disarmed him more than the brilliance ever had. Finally, the CEO nodded, almost reluctantly. Very well. But know this, if you ever change your mind, my door is open. Ethan rose, thanked him quietly, and left. He returned to his modest apartment that evening, the same place he had always lived. He brewed himself a cup of coffee, opened the library book he had borrowed on advanced coding, and continued studying. The world outside buzzed with headlines, with speculation, with awe. But Ethan was at peace. He didn't crave the spotlight. He didn't need applause. He knew what he was capable of, and that was enough. As for the antagonists, their downfall came quietly but surely. Hargrave, stripped of her influence, watched as whispers of her arrogance spread through the company. The young executive, once smug, faced charges and the end of his career. Others carried the sting of shame, their reputations fractured by their behavior that night. The janitor they had laughed at became a symbol, not of power gained, but of humility proven. He returned to his routine with quiet dignity, a living reminder that greatness often hides in the most overlooked places. In the end, Caldwell Technologies survived, but the lesson carved itself deeper than any profit margin. The empire stood because a young janitor, invisible to them all, chose to speak when it mattered most. And Ethan? He remained Ethan, steady, humble, unseen by choice, yet unforgettable to those who had once mocked him. And just like that, the story of a young janitor who saved a billionaire's empire comes to a close. But the real message isn't about billionaires or corporate boardrooms. It's about you. Think about it, Ethan didn't have the pedigree, the polished suit, or the reputation. All he had was knowledge, persistence, and the courage to step forward when no one else would. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove people wrong? Share your story in the comments, because your voice might be the encouragement someone else needs today. And if you believe in the power of the underdog, if you love seeing ordinary people rise up to do extraordinary things, then make sure to follow this channel. Together, we're building a community that celebrates resilience, courage, and those moments where the overlooked shine the brightest. Because remember, the world may doubt you, but your moment to surprise them is always closer than you think.